Hello and welcome to Guardbeardia. I am the Beldam. The great Guardbeardia has heard your outcries of rage and anguish, and he has answered them with fish-faced retribution. Enjoy the chapter.
Additionally, be sure to stop by and take a look at our first affiliate, the people at Redcon 1. I wanted to find an affiliate that I knew you guys could use and someone that I use, and I thought a lot of you guys are working. You're all hard workers, the lot of you. And I work hard too while I'm writing, and sometimes we don't eat as healthy as we should, if eating at all. And I needed to find something that I could eat while writing that wouldn't get my fingers all messy and have the things I needed to help build muscle after working out. And by doing that, I found Redcon 1. It's an animal-based protein meal replacement that's not full of soy and the other things your body doesn't really need. And it tastes like food. It's a meal replacement shake powder that tastes like food. You can put it in water. You can put it in milk. Hell, you can put that shit in orange juice if you like, or coffee. But it'll help you build the muscle you need, have the energy you need, and give you the food you need to keep going through the day. I'm using it while writing for you. I can clickety-clack away and not even bother to stop and just slug this frickin' shake down and keep on going. I know some of you are truckers or long haulers or office workers. I know I got all kinds of folks who listen to my stuff. And the one thing we all need is food. And I can get you 20% off your order. Like, that's a lot. It's a lot of money. And this is food. You're buying food you just mix with water or milk or whatever. So be sure to stop by the affiliate link down below in the information box, whatever the hell it's called. Get you a discount code and just try it out. Because we all need to eat. But sometimes we ain't got the time to eat. And I want you to stay healthy. Redcon 1. It's food.
Chapter 6. A New Acquaintance. Pikeface wasn't moving after taking the Ursa penetrator to the stomach, and the first few shots from her CZ-75 caught a few of the other cultists by surprise, the 9mm jacketed hollow points boring through their chests and bursting out the other side like a fist made of flesh. Unfortunately, she had taken the amount of cultists for granted, and realized after a war cry from her right that there were actually 20 cultists, not 10. She narrowed her eyes at them as they picked up random weapons lying around, from wood-chopping axes to their own handguns, and she thought angrily to her new friend that was currently pumping magic into her veins.
I'm not very good at counting. Never was my strong suit. My apologies.
You and I are going to have a word if I survive this. Emily thought and twisted, bringing her pistol in her left hand to bear and pulling up her mare's leg to point at the forehead of a catfishy-faced man that was running at her with a faintly glowing berserker axe. She fired rapidly with her CZ-75 at the group rushing towards her, aiming more at the only slightly scaly woman wielding a coach gun, the slide locking to the rear after only a few rounds, but they found their mark and the woman dropped to her knees, grabbing at the blossoming red stains in her stomach and chest. Berserker Boy was only a few feet away, and she pointed the mare's leg at his chest, belching out the .357 Ursa penetrator and cocking the lever action milliseconds after it left the barrel, using the backwards momentum to kick the buttstock forward and ratchet the lever expertly. The penetrator split the man's spine with a crack of bone and the crush of meat, scattering white calcium and red flesh all over the cooling body of Troutface. He went limp instantly, his legs stopping their momentum and coming together, which caused the rest of his body to come down and slam into the ground with a rush of pine needles and leaves. The berserker axe bounced and rattled past Emily's feet, the glow fading away like the light of a dying flame. With a quick count, that left 16 combat-capable combatants in her area, and she was not a fan of those numbers. One of the cultists, this one with eel eyes and jagged teeth pressed into a human face, rushed at her with a woodcutter's axe, hefting it over his head with a guttural hiss. Without an easy way to reload, Emily fast-pitched her CZ-75 into the middle of his face with her augmented strength, and the heavy steel frame pistol embedded itself into the nasal cavity of his face, sticking wetly into the skull with a hollow thock sound. The eel man screamed and dropped the axe, scrabbling at his face as blood poured out around the hole that was now playing host to a burning hot pistol. "Like to see a Glock pull that off," Emily said gamely with a grin, and quickly slapped a few more rounds into the side gate of the mare's leg.
Is Glock a famous warrior of your realm?
Asked the voice, his tone curious. "Nah, just a waste of money," Emily replied, and ran forward, reaching down and ripping a fixed-blade belt knife from the waist of the wailing eel man. He was not having a good time with life, as the CZ-75 was buried so deep into his face that it was causing blood to leak around his brain, and his eyes were rolling back into his head as he continued to cry out wordlessly. The blade was a bit rusty, but appeared to be some form of broken back sax, the metal etched with what looked like old-fashioned runes. It didn't glow or anything, but was sharper than hell if the gleam of the edge was anything to go by. Emily felt the magic pumping through her blood as she whirled, grabbing a cultist by his jaw and pulling him in front of her in time so he could catch the blast from the coach gun, his back erupting in crimson as the buckshot ruined his body. Scaly woman seemed to have a bit of fight left in her, Emily watching as she cracked open the breech of the double barrels and letting the shells fly over her shoulder. Emily was more than happy to remove that fight from her by force, bringing the mare's leg up under the man's arm and putting an Ursa penetrator straight through her right eye. What really made Emily smile was the ease of which she was moving around the battlefield, as if she were an elf whirling through a pack of goblins like something out of a movie or a manga. Her confidence took a knock as her human shield slashed at her shoulder with a pocket knife, digging the blade deep into her own skin and muscle, gouging out a long gash. As soon as the blade skidded off her bone and the attack was on the exit, her skin erupted in flames, the hot licks of light sealing up the wound as quickly as it was made. While handy, the pain was excruciating, and Emily roared out in agony.
Let me get that.
"You call that helping?"
It's better than bleeding out. Be such a waste of good blood.
Emily growled and brought her knee up, catching her human shield in his fishy balls and pulling the mare's leg out from under his arm. The man gave an oof and came down to a knee, dropping his knife and reaching down to protect his jewels purely by instinct. He looked up in pain, just in time to see Emily stick her barrel in between his eyes and pull the trigger, blowing the contents of his head and the back of his skull cap across the ground behind him. Before the body even began its short descent to the ground, Emily snap-cocked the mare's leg, flipped it around to grab it by the barrel, and cracked another charging cultist over the side of the head with it. The heat of the barrel caused her no pain, which caught Emily by surprise, and she flicked the rifle back round, catching it by the grip and putting a penetrator into the back of the cultist, having fallen to the ground unconscious after her strike. Unlike the movies where the bad guys attacked in an orderly fashion and waited their turn, the real-life bad guys were trying to mob her, and Emily was ducking and whirling more than she could attack. A cultist would stab or slash with a weapon, she would dodge, slap a round into the loading gate of her mare's leg, dip under a swing, slap another round in, and repeat until her rifle was topped off. It was not all without pain, as there were times where too many attacks came in at once and something would slice down her stomach or back, which would then erupt in flames as the magic in her body seared the wound closed and healed it. By the time there were only 8 cultists left in the fight, Emily looked as if she had been beaten by a whip made of flame, her clothes singed, burned, and bloody. The more she killed, the more she was wounded, the stronger and fiercer she felt. She could see her hair as she spun, slashed, and fired, and it was glowing radiantly, shimmering like ocean waves of flame. 2 of the braver cultists lunged together, one wielding a spear and the other an M4 with a bayonet lugged onto the end of the barrel. The one with the M4 was a cheeky little bastard and looked like a spooked guppy, and Emily realized he had the damn thing on its select fire setting as he missed the thrust and let rip 3 rounds that cracked and spat just in front of her face. She leaned backwards, slashed at him with the sax, then leaned to the right as the spear tip of the other cultist hissed past her cheek. She reached up with her sax hand, caught the spear in the crook of her arm, shot forward to get more of the pull, then wrenched her body, whipping the spear cultist through the air and over, and slamming him into the ground behind her. She actually heard a light clapping in her head, and couldn't help but roll her eyes, even as she kicked another charging cultist in the chest and took him off his feet.
Oh, splendid. I have not seen such moves since I was lost beyond the eye.
The eye? Emily asked, charging forward over the fallen man she had kicked in the chest and rugby tackling another scaled female cultist, taking her to the ground and plunging the sax deep into her heart, twisting the knife so hard that it snapped 2 of her ribs in twain. Even after the blade rent her heart, the cultist still had a fight left in her, and stabbed Emily in the side with a dagger. Emily screeched and began punching the face of the cultist into pulp, even as flames spewed out around the dagger and pushed it out from her body, sealing the wound shut and sizzling the spilled blood around it.
Oh, it was an annoying place. Only chaos and never a wink of peace. I don't miss it much. The guppy thing is taking aim at you, by the way.
Emily whipped her head around and saw the barrel of that M4 staring at her and rolled backwards, grabbing the cultist she had kicked and rolling him into a fireman's carry. She, of course, had no intention of riding him, staying on her knees after she completed the roll, but was intent on using him to soak up the majority of the energy that was about to be ripping towards her as soon as Guppyface decided to pulse the entire magazine of 5.56 ball ammo at her. As soon as she heard the first 3 beat of the rifle, she looked up and saw the spear of the other cultist coming at her at a high rate of speed.
That's going to suck.
I'm aware, Emily thought loudly and sucked in a breath as the spear tip punched through her chest, right below her heart. The pain was unlike anything she had ever felt before in her life, and she gasped, breathing out harshly and coarsely as the head carved a path for the shaft to follow. She felt the tip rip out of her back muscles and the shaft of the spear weigh heavily inside of her, and she coughed, blood foaming up and over her lips. The blood licked up with flames as soon as it made contact with the air, and she spat, sending a little trail of happily crackling flames across the ground. The wood of the shaft began to burn inside of her, and the guppy-faced man began to empty his magazine into the body she had shot blocking her back. The 5.56 rounds thudding into the body turned corpse to the tune of a rapid tap dance. The cultist that threw the spear stepped aside, followed by another one who walked up and pulled out a handgun from a shoulder holster. A stainless 1911 that looked to be packing the .45 that usually came with the title, judging from the size of the bore. Holding the corpse as she was unable to bring up her mare's leg, and if she didn't move, she was going to more likely than catch a .45 to her skull. She spat again and grimaced as the 2 5.56 rounds tumbled into her body, having skipped through the meat of the corpse shield and embedded themselves into her shoulder blade. By her count, he had a single burst left, and the 1911 cultist was bringing up his pistol, ready to give her the coup de grace as he walked towards her, trying to get within feet to ensure the kill. Damn, we're in a tight spot.
Come on. I'm sure you can take getting shot a few times. Look at the size of the spear in you.
The spear is very uncomfortable, I hope you know.
Yes, well, most women find the spear uncomfortable at first.
Looks like you're bad at 2 things, counting and telling jokes.
My lady, you wound me.
Shut up and keep me alive. This is going to be a sucking chest wound, I just know it. Emily readied herself, cocked her core muscles, and closed her eyes, counting with the quickness that her magical blood allowed. She heard the hammer come back on the 1911 and lock above the beaver tail, the cultist's hand gripping the backstrap safety in the eagerness of the kill. She heard the lug of the M4's bolt unlock and the spring of the buffer tube rattle slightly, preparing for the bolt to slide back and pick up another round. She could maybe reduce her getting hit to just 1 or 2, but she would have to time the spin perfectly. She counted the milliseconds, waited for the soft crack of triggers, and then exploded into motion, contracting her stomach muscles and spinning on her knees in time with the barrels discharging their payloads. As she spun, she flicked open her emerald eyes, and they flashed as bright as the fire of her red hair. She had enough time to see Marill in the short distance staring at her, eyes wide and worried. Emily decided to ham it up a bit despite the amount of pain she was in, and winked at Marill as she spun, coming around to face the guppy-headed cultist. The momentum of her spin caused the burnt-away shaft of the spear to buckle, the main haft falling away from the anchor point under her rib cage, and the head was shunted out with a puff of flames, flaming blood splattering on the ground and forming a half-moon of licking flames. The full metal jacket rounds that had pierced her back were rejected at the same time, the magical heat melting them and popping them out of her skin in a stream of molten lead and copper. Due to her spin, the .45 impacted her shield's head instead of her own, and her hair became speckled with his brain matter and skull fragments, which sizzled and spat as if it were food sitting on a hot skillet. 1 of the 3 round bursts were caught by her shield, but the other 2 impacted at her left shoulder and the right in the middle of her left lung. Emily coughed hard as she felt the round rip a hole through her lung and punch out the back of her ribs, and a spout of flame lurched out of her mouth as the wound was healed by the borrowed magic inside of her, the gout of fire curling up past her eyebrows and diffusing into the air above her head with a crackle of sparks. The guppy gawped at her, the bolt of his M4 locking into the rear of an empty magazine, and her glowing emerald eyes locked into his bulbish fishy eyes. They stared at each other silently as the 1911-wielding cultist cursed, and she could hear him racking the slide, trying to work past a malfunction.
I'm sorry,
Guppy-Face said, and dropped the M4, raising his hands up in surrender. Emily raised up her mare's leg, finally able to shrug off her body shield enough to raise her arm up, and she leveled her sights in the middle of his chest. "Apology accepted, asshole!" she growled and put a .357 Ursa penetrator right into where his heart should be. His fishy eyes went wide as he placed a hand right over the wound that was smoking in his chest, and he looked down, then up at Emily, who didn't move or react. He fell down to a knee, a hand still held over his chest.
Man, getting shot sucks.
"Tell me about it," Emily muttered as the bullet holes in her lungs sealed together with a hiss, and molten lead and copper were spat out of her shoulder once again. She gave another cough, followed with an additional gout of flame, and stood, racking her mare's leg as Guppy-Face gave his own gurgly cough and fell to the ground, no longer moving. The ruin of his back opened to the sky. 4 cultists were still combatable, but quick gun work put down 2 in quick succession, their bodies crumpling to the ground as they attempted to rush at her. She turned, and a throwing axe thunked heavily into her chest, biting deeply and greedily into her pectoral muscles and marring her breast. She looked down at the axe, ripping it out with a hiss and a fist of boiling blood, and looked up at the cultist who still had her hand out in the same fashion she had released the axe. The 1911 cultist began to panic, and was rattling and racking the pistol in a mad sprint to unjam it. Emily sniffed, and what she said next made her new friend giggle and chuckle in her mind from how blasé she was about it. "Nice follow-through. Were you the one who chucked that fucking spear into me?" Yes. That hurt." The mare's leg was a blur as Emily whipped it up and snap-fired, blowing a hole the size of a cantaloupe out of the cultist's fishy neck. The cultist's eyes widened in shock and her hands flew to her neck, scrabbling at the lack of flesh and choking wetly on the blood that was flowing into her lungs. Her friend roared with laughter in her head, and she smiled as well, watching as the cultist bent over to choke, gurgle, cough, and gasp for air around her ruined throat. The 1911 cultist was almost in hysterics as Emily racked the action of her mare's leg, and in a desperate bid for respite, chucked the 1911 pistol at Emily, which bounced off of her chest with a thud. "Really?" Emily murmured, smirking at him as she picked up the pistol. "Look, all you did was double feed. When this happens, you drop the magazine." Emily clicked the magazine release and pulled the magazine from its well in the pistol grip. "Then you lock it to the rear, give it a jiggle or a tap, clear the jammed ammunition, replace the magazine, and let the slide go forward." She did so, clearing the malfunction from the weapon and putting it into battery with one in the chamber. "There, see? All fixed. Here, try again." Emily gestured with the pistol, then tossed it at the cultist, who caught it with both hands. Confusion struck on his face. He stared down at the 1911 in his hands, and when he looked up from the pistol to Emily, he saw that she had raised the barrel up, pointing it at his face, and had rushed forward a few paces with lightning speed. "Hesitant fella, aren't you?" The Ursa penetrator ripped the soul from his body out of the back of his brain, and his body joined the collection that was littering the campground. Emily was smoking heavily from all over her body, and she breathed in deeply, in and out, working through the pain that was reverberating through every fiber of her being. She learned that getting sliced up sucked, getting stabbed with a spear sucked more, and that getting shot sucked the most. All these new flavors of pain that she never wanted to taste, yet had no choice but to swallow. She sighed as the smoke began to lessen, and slid a few more rounds into her loading gate, stepping forward with a slight hitch. Behind her, the cultist lacking a throat gurgled her last, having fallen to the ground as her lungs were unable to support the ability to breathe due to the amount of fluids rushing into them.
My apologies, but the magic is being used up at an extremely high rate. I will try to keep you able to walk, but avoid getting wounded anymore. Not really a problem since you killed everybody. Look, 19 bodies.
20 bodies, you mean? Emily thought, and she placed her free hand over the huge scar where the spear had dug in deep.
Nope, 19.
Don't move. Move and she dies.
Emily closed her eyes, annoyed and exasperated, then opened them, turning to look where Marill was. Pikeface had apparently been playing possum, and was now holding a long, wicked-looking blade to Marill's neck. Emily strolled over, casual, cool, and twirling the mare's leg in her shooting hand. "What's the game plan, Pikeface?"
The centaur and I are leaving. You move, I kill her. I swear I will.
"What are you, some kind of movie villain?" Emily said, rolling her shoulders and holding her hands out in an annoyed fashion. The thing had its head right next to Marill's, the knife against her throat, and had even squatted down behind her as if to use her as a shield. Emily reached down and ripped her CZ-75 from the face of the dead cultist she'd buried it in, and dropped the magazine into her hand, tucking it away and smacking in a fresh one. She walked up within 7 yards of Marill and got her footing. "Seriously? You are such a stupid asshole. You think I'm just gonna let you walk out here with my friend, and you're going to do the whole evil hostage takeover trope with a knife to her neck? You need to stop watching so many movies, pal." She brought up her CZ-75 and placed the center post just under and to the right of his left eye, then cocked back the hammer, the slack coming away from the trigger as it went into single action. "Also, don't leave so much of your head hanging out, you schmuck." The CZ-75 gave a bark and a 9mm jacket hollow point zipped right into the tear duct of Pikeface's eye, the jacket blooming and fist-fucking his brain out the back of his head. The Pikeface gave a shudder and went limp, falling away from Marill and the knife thudding onto the ground harmlessly. Emily brought the barrel to her lips, blew away the smoke furling up from the hot gore smoking on the barrel, and rode the hammer forward before putting it back into her shoulder holster. Emily swaggered forward, brought up the broken back sacks, and quickly cut away at Marill's bindings. When her legs and hands were free, she helped cut away the gag around her mouth, and Marill coughed, looking up at Emily in wonder and awe. Emily, you came." "Of course I did. I need those boobies of yours for a pillow tonight." Marill choked out a short laugh, her eyes filling with tears rapidly, and she hugged Emily. She hugged Emily tightly and wholly. Emily didn't fight it and hugged her back, clutching her head to her still-smoking chest. Emily let Marill curl around her and petted lightly at her messy, bloody hair and cut-up ears, working her fingers through and plucking out any leaves or sticks that had gotten in with the drying blood. "Emily?" "Yeah, Marill?" "You smell like bacon." Emily snorted in surprise, then erupted into laughter she felt right in her wounded belly, Marill following suit as she sniffed and tried to wipe away the tears in her eyes. Emily's lungs hurt still, and her chest felt like it felt like it had a fucking spear shaft in it only a few minutes before, but she laughed in relief that Marill was not broken, and was still the Marill she knew. Then she heard another laughter in her mind, the laughter of the thing that had made it so Emily could even survive all that she went through. And she raised her face up from Marill's hair, feeling the presence of something behind her. There was something laying among the cooling bodies and used weapons of her fallen enemies. The small dancing flames where her blood continued to burn danced on it from where it lay in the cultist's treasure hoard. The thing that had helped her, that had helped Marill, was patiently waiting for her to turn her attention to it, and Emily leaned down next to Marill's ear, whispering as quietly as she could. "There's someone else here, Marill. It helped us, but I had to make an agreement." Marill's mood took a slight dive, and she clutched at the bloody and ruined sleeves of Emily's uniform top. "Wait, Emily, what kind of deal? What was it?" Emily smoothed the top of Marill's bloodied hair and stared into the eyes of Pikeface, giving Marill a light pat on the back of her head. "Don't worry. In the end, I think it was worth it. I'm gonna go talk to it real quick. Try and work the feeling back into your legs and check yourself out." "What do you mean, it?" Marill whispered out in panic, but Emily was already moving away towards the treasure pile, and could see something glowing from inside the pile.
Is she all right?
She's fine, Emily thought, pulling away at the rucksacks and satchels that the cultists had taken from their spoils of war. She's a bit bloody, but she's all right.
Good. And you seem to more or less be in working order.
More or less. Emily pulled away at a few more rucksacks from the pile, tossing them aside, and stared down at a little piece of solid jewelry that was sitting near the bottom of the hoard, nestled into a small pile of pine needles and leaves.
Hello. Good to finally meet you in person. Figuratively speaking, anyway.
When it said it hoped she liked necklaces, she figured it was going to look like something that would be hanging up in a place of honor at Tiffany's. Instead, she was staring down at a simple gold torque, braided perfectly and symmetrically all the way around its loop. Near the throat of the torque, one end was a horse and the other a spear tip, each of which intricately etched in woven patterns that were so small that it seemed as if fairies had helped in their creation. Emily reached down and picked up the torque necklace, holding it up to the light of the campfires and the spitting flames of her burning blood. Light danced and crackled across the gold metal, seeming to be lost in the swirls and whirls of its etchings.
A pretty thing, aren't I? She liked me as well.
Who are you? Emily thought in a whisper, turning the torque in her hand.
A wandering spirit who found kinship in a queen. You may know of her in her battles with the fetid Romans.
Emily smiled fangedly, curling her mouth so the light of the flames sparkled on her canines. Are you talking about Boudica?
Boudica, yes. I was there for her eyes, and there for her fall. Lots of hatred and rage in that woman. Passion and fierceness as well. You wouldn't remind me much of her. She was taller, though. Perhaps you can wear heeled boots.
I'm content with my combat boots. So the battle is over and my friend is safe. Now what?
You keep your side of the deal. This form was fashioned for me to be worn and carried, to bear me forth to battle. I was a soldier, a warrior, way long ago in the Eye, and served my mistress until I was laid low by non-believers of our faith. I was sundered and wandered through the plains until I came here, long ago in your history. I was in her tomb, laying with my last mistress, when I was suddenly stolen away by the things these mutants call a liege, and have been casted about since, as if I were bait to a fish.
Ah, see, I thought the exact same thing, like they were fishing for us with shiny stuff. Emily felt quite proud of herself, even as this talking necklace thought it was like fishing as well. Then she remembered that the fisherman almost walked away with his catch back in Walla Walla and cleared her throat. The torque seemed to be in her mind as well, and it chuckled.
Close one, that. But yes, I was found by a pair of humans some weeks ago. They were ambushed and cut down, being too close to the water's edge. And I was taken. Have been here since then. It appears that these wretches had been gathering all manner of things for use in their great crusade.
Crusade?
Ah, yes, they talked amongst themselves as they ate what they butchered, and spoke of a crusade against those who walked the land and breathed the dry air. It is ironic, as I was first sundered by a great crusade of the same variety.
What else did they say? How close were they?
Not very. They are still teething, it seems, and cannot even break the fortress where the purifier lays. But enough of that. Please, the other end of the deal.
All right. Keep your etchings on. Emily gave the little band a soft tug, and it opened, allowing her enough space to get it around her neck, and she slid it around the right side of her throat. She heard a worried sound from behind her where Marill was. Emily? It's okay, it seems friendly enough. Emily chirped and flashed a smile at Marill to calm her, and the centaur's ears perked up at the expression.
Allow me,
it said, and she felt the metal near the center of the band heat slightly, allowing her to bend it more easily. Such a gentleman, Emily thought to it, and closed it properly around her throat.
I hope my old mistress in the Eye doesn't hear that. She would flay me.
Oh, don't worry. You keep being friendly, and I might even get you polished.
It has been a long time since I had what did you people call it? Spa day.
Emily chortled and pulled her hair free of the band, fluffing it out and shaking the burnt ashen flesh from the strands. With her mare's leg fully loaded, as well as her CZ-75, she helped Marill up onto her hoofs, making sure she was okay to walk and checking the rest of her gear to see what was all missing. Marill had quite a few deep cuts along her flanks and legs, and her chest was a mess of bruises thanks to the depraved assault by Pikeface, but she was able to move around on her own. As Emily was checking over Marill's stomach to see if Pikeface had cut her any deeper, she heard the torque clear its throat in her head.
Would it not be prudent to get the poor lass a new shirt?
Emily brought her head up and stared right into the space between Marill's bare chest, the two mounds on either side of her face. Ah, right. Let's find you a new shirt, Marill. Marill looked down, grimaced, then held her arm in front of her breasts. A fair amount of blood and splattered organ pieces had gotten on them from the carnage of the battle that had erupted around her, plus the blood of the harpy had soaked down to her flesh after she was dragged through it. Maybe a canteen of water and a towel, too. I don't feel too confident about leaving fish-person brains splashed across my jugs. Emily turned on her heel and jogged off to fetch them for her, but she heard a splutter of laughter in her head and could almost see a figure leaning down on their knees and laughing to the point they began to wheeze.
Why in the name of the brass spires would she call them jugs? And that's the end of this chapter, part of the Emily Braun series. If you like this story and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbeardia, as well as click the bell icon so you know when the videos are released through the week. If you really like the story and want to help contribute to the channel, be sure to stop by the Ko-fi link and donate whatever you guys feel like to help stream things along. We appreciate you stopping by and listening to the story either for the first time or once again. This has been Guard Bro. It's been the Bell Dam, and this is Guardbeardia.